Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Susie. I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. I really hope that you enjoyed last week's episode conversation with Dr. Dallas Bragg. I am going to be hosting more conversations with different people, different backgrounds and different experiences. So I do hope that you enjoyed the first installment of that part of the podcast series. Today, I want to focus on spiritual downloads. This is a term that gets used a lot in the spiritual community, and I know when you are new to your spiritual awakening journey and you're searching these things up, it can be very confusing, it can be very overwhelming. So I really want to go back to basics on what spiritual downloads are, common misconceptions about spiritual downloads, signs that you're having a download, and how to work with spiritual downloads. First of all, let's get into what a spiritual download actually is from an energetic perspective so you can have a better understanding. Now, spiritual downloads are a feature of claircognizance. If you are unsure what I mean by claircognizance, please do go back to the episode on intuition, spiritual development, because in that episode I go into each of the different clair senses. For today, it's just enough to know that spiritual downloads are a feature of claircognizance and that everybody has all of the clairs. Claircognizance may or may not be your strongest clair, but spiritual downloads are a feature of your claircognizance in operation. What is happening when you receive a spiritual download is you're receiving guidance from a higher frequency source. That could be source itself, that could be angels, archangels, it could be your soul, it could be your spirit guides, but there's information being received that is of a higher frequency that is to be helpful to you and ultimately to the collective. When it comes to the chakra system, when you receive a spiritual download, you are going to be working with a number of chakras. Always remember that the chakra system is a system. So yes, individual chakras are often involved in certain things, but the system works as a whole. In the case of claircognizance and receiving spiritual downloads, you're going to be working with the crown chakra because you're often receiving that information in from higher vibrational sources. You are going to be working potentially with the altar major chakra because this is a chakra that is often used by your higher self, by your spirit guides to send information into you. It's your direct messaging system from your guides. And you're going to be working with your heart chakra. And the heart chakra is the place where you essentially translate the information received from the crown chakra or the altar major chakra or a combination of both. You're working with the whole system and you want the download not just to come into the crown, for example, you want to be able to bring it into the heart chakra and translate it. This is so that you can then make use of the download that you are receiving. So before I get into the signs of a download, so you can know when you are receiving one of these downloads and also how to work with them and how to strengthen your work with them, I really want to go through some of the common misconceptions around spiritual downloads because lots of you will be receiving downloads but dismissing it because of these misconceptions. Number one has got to be that you can force these downloads to happen. There's a lot of focus in the spiritual community about forcing things to happen, forcing your third eye to open, forcing your heart to open, forcing areas of yourself to be activated. And this is predominantly because as a society, we are very focused on taking action all of the time, being productive all of the time. And it isn't that taking action and taking steps to enhance certain gifts and abilities is bad. It's just that in certain cases, it's much better to focus on the passive or the neutral aspects. Different gifts and abilities are strengthened by active, passive, and neutral energy, and they all have an aspect of each. With downloads, there is an active element to it, which we'll get to, but it's not about forcing these things to happen. To start with, if you're wanting to enhance your ability to receive downloads, it's more about opening and making space to enhance your capacity to receive. So it's making yourself the clearest channel that you can be. Another misconception that I see a lot of the time is that when someone says about receiving a download, people will think that they're not receiving downloads because they're only receiving bits of information. Lots of the time, people expect downloads to be full, precise, concise information. And that does happen. There are times when you are receiving downloads where the message is very clear and where it is the full message coming through in one sitting. That does happen. I'm not dismissing that, but that isn't always the case. And the majority of the time, what is going to happen is you're going to receive downloads over a period of time. You may receive part of a download, and then it may be 2-3 weeks, months later that you receive additional information to that download. So for anyone who is receiving downloads, I would recommend having a function, so having a notebook or a note on your phone apps to just pay attention to these drops of information that are coming in, because what you'll often find is that a download and the information of the download can build over a certain period of time. Another misconception that comes up with this one is that only certain people are able to receive downloads. This is not true. There are certain people who have claircognizance as their strongest clair, and this may be that they are very open to receiving downloads, that they do receive lots of downloads, but that doesn't mean that they are better than you. And it doesn't mean that they have some secret practice that allows them to be able to receive those downloads in. Always remember with the clair senses, they are often developed over many incarnations. And it may just be that this person who you're comparing yourself to has developed their claircognizance over many lifetimes and who has really mastered the skill of receiving them. And that's okay, but everybody has the capacity and the ability to receive spiritual downloads. As I noted earlier, you can receive spiritual downloads from lots of different places. And one of the misconceptions that comes up is that you have to be able to identify the source of a download for it to be real. The where does it come from? Now, where does it come from is important, but not in respect of can I identify the source? Can I give it a name? Can I know what dimension this information is coming from? A lot of the time, especially when you get into really high dimensional levels of consciousness, it's a collective consciousness. And this can be off-putting for some people because they want to be able to say this information came from this being, they live in this dimension, therefore I can trust it. What you're supposed to do with downloads is you're supposed to take the information, bring it into the body, into the heart chakra, and feel into whether or not this resonates. This receiving of downloads is very much a part of your discernment training. So it's less about where does the information come from? Can I give it a name? Can I give it a label? And more, does this feel like truth? Does this feel like wisdom? Is this guiding me to be more in connection to myself, to the planet, to everybody on the planet? Or is this feeding my ego? Is this trying to put me into an energy of separation and just telling me what I want to hear? So receiving spiritual downloads is part of that discernment training, and it is asking you to go back to that question of, does this resonate with me? And it's completely okay if you receive a download in and it doesn't resonate with you. It may be that it's not from an energy that has your highest good in mind. And it may also be that that download isn't going to resonate with you for 2 or 3 years. So this training of the discernment system is part of a function of the spiritual download. On that issue of receiving information from a being or an energy that does not have your highest good in mind, that is not of the light, essentially. A lot of the time, people will have that experience and then they shut themselves off completely. They don't want to receive any more information. They don't want to do any more development. And I want you to know that if you do receive information from an energy or a being that is not of the evolutionary stream, it's completely okay and it's completely normal. It's part of that discernment training to be able to feel when information resonates and when information doesn't resonate. So please, I don't want any of you to feel like, oh, hang on, I received this information, it didn't sit right, I didn't feel that resonance, I should just shut down completely, or I should pay no attention to any information that's coming in, or even worse, when people think, oh, I've connected to this energy, therefore I've now got this entity attached to me. Okay, so please, if this is you, if you've had an experience where you've received a download and it just hasn't sit quite right, that's completely okay. That's part of the process. Now that we know what a download is, the parts of our chakra system that we're going to be working with, and also how to deal with the noise, those misconceptions out there about downloads, let's take a look at the signs of a download. So, what you might experience when you are receiving a download. Number one has to be physical sensations, and this can feel like a tingling, a pressure, a heat in either the crown chakra or the altar major chakra. The altar major chakra, for those of you who aren't aware, is located at the back of the neck. And for those of you who've seen The Matrix, my easiest description of this on a podcast is think of where Neo was plugged in to the Matrix. That is the location of the altar major chakra. So if you're having physical sensations either at the back of the neck or at the crown, this is a sign that you're starting to receive downloads in. The most common things I see when I am working in somebody's Akashic Records is a backup of downloads. So this can be seen as a tightness or a pressure in the back of the neck or in the crown. Most often in the altar major chakra, I have to say, there can be this backup of downloads. And in those instances, it can be very important to give yourself time and space to integrate those downloads through. It's also something that we can do in Akashic clearing, where we help those downloads to come in for processing. The second sign that you are receiving a download is ear ringing. And this is not continual ear ringing. That is tinnitus. That is a medical condition. And please seek medical help if that's the case. But if you have an on and off, you experience ear ringing, especially if you're experiencing ear ringing when you're spending time in neutral energy, this can be a really good sign that you're receiving downloads in. This is because of the location that downloads are received, so either the crown or the altar major chakra, which is the back of the throat chakra. And of course, the throat chakra is very connected to clairaudience. Because you're receiving information in a different frequency, it can feel like ear ringing is taking place. This is that tuning into a different frequency. So thinking of yourself as a radio and you're tuning into different channels. And when you're not quite on the right channel, for those of you who remember tuning in radios, there can often be static, there can often be a little bit of distortion, and that's what's taking place when you're receiving a download. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to receive the download as a clairaudient message. You may still receive it as that claircognizance, or it may be that your clairaudience is now turning on. Next sign would be that you are having these inspirational moments or these aha moments. You just all of a sudden feel inspired to do something different, inspired to take action in a different way. That's a really good sign that you're receiving downloads. Because you can receive different parts of downloads in at different times, it's really important, if you feel like you're someone who is receiving these downloads, to start paying attention to your dreams, because oftentimes when you're going through a period of receiving downloads, there can be additional information, additional clarity that you're seeking in dream state. Dreams at this time will often become more vivid. They will often feel like there's information and a message behind them. And it may even be that you go into a more lucid dreaming state so you can do some inquiry work in that dream state. Not only will you feel more inspired to do certain things, but you will have this burst of creative energy. You will feel inspired to take certain action. You may find that there's more productivity. You have all of these great ideas, and it's very important when this happens to not burn yourself out, to make a note of everything that you've received and all the action that you want to take, but then give yourself time to also practice in the passive and in the neutral so that you don't burn yourself out. This burst of creative energy is beautiful and helpful, and I'm sure we've all experienced this where we don't need sleep, we don't need food, we can just get on with the work in hand. But it is very important to look after yourself when this happens. The last sign I want to get into is that higher wisdom, which is often paradoxical, will start to make sense when you receive downloads in. So it may be that you came across some information, you read a book, you listened to a podcast episode 2, 3 years ago, and it just didn't resonate, it didn't sit right, or it just didn't make sense to you, because a lot of the higher spiritual teachings are very paradoxical. And it can be that it can take some time for that to really hit, to really resonate. So when you receive downloads in, it's often this higher wisdom coming through, and you're able to really see the objective truth behind a certain spiritual teaching. Now that we've covered those signs, so you're going to be able to get a feel for, am I experiencing these spiritual downloads? Let's talk a little bit about how to increase that capacity to receive. As I noted earlier, you can't force downloads to come in, but you can increase your capacity to receive. First has to be spending time in that neutral energy. I know I sound like a broken record talking about neutral energy, but I do so because our society is so designed to have you in either active or passive. Neutral time is not a thing that is promoted by society in any way, shape, or form. It's beautiful to see that it is becoming something that is talked about more. So you have the slow living movement that's coming forward, the slow productivity that's been brought forward. There's lots of people out there doing really great work to try and get people to spend more time in neutral, but the very fast pace and being connected to each other all across the globe 24 hours a day because of the internet, it means that we have to consciously and actively take some time to be in that neutral energy. We have to take some time to disconnect from everything and make space to just be. Just being and spending time to just be with everything exactly as it is a spiritual practice, and it takes time and it takes practice to be able to get comfortable with doing that. But this just being and this spending time in neutral energy is undoubtedly one of the best ways to increase that capacity to receive those spiritual downloads in. The second tip is to actually ask some questions. Okay. One of the questions that comes up most in people's Akashic Records readings is they say, how can I deepen my connection to my guide team, my soul, source, my spirit guides, whatever? And the answer that comes back most often is you actually have to ask questions, because as you will have heard me talk about before on the podcast, no true guide is going to infringe upon your free will. If you aren't asking questions, if you aren't asking for guidance in certain areas, your guides are not going to step forward. They're not going to try and make you go in a certain direction. The process of asking for help and asking for guidance is what's going to open up that channel for you then to receive. The trick with it, and the hard part of it with us, is to then let go and drop all expectations of receiving an answer. So it's asking for help and then just letting the answer come in as and when it wants to come in whichever form it wants to come in. Sometimes you'll receive the answer in the form of a spiritual download, either a full download or a partial download. Sometimes you'll receive the answer in a meeting that you have with another individual, and they give you some information and that answers the question. Sometimes you may receive the answer as a book recommendation or come across a video on YouTube that answers the question. We have to drop that expectation of how it's going to be received and then just let life teach us how it's going to be received and be open to receiving in all these different ways. The last tip on increasing capacity is to work with those individual chakras that I mentioned. The crown chakra isn't one that holds a lot of stagnation because of the nature of it and where it is and its function. But one thing that can really cause problems with the crown chakra is religious trauma. If you've had a difficult experience with religion, then definitely look at working through healing that, because that's going to impact your connection to the crown chakra. The ultra major chakra tends to be stagnant in the respect of having too many downloads. So tip one of making space and spending time in neutral energy will help those to integrate through. And of course, you can focus in your spiritual practice with the intention of clearing that ultra major chakra. The main emotion that will stagnate the heart chakra is grief. So if there is anything that you consciously know that you are grieving, then do give that space and do give that time to work itself through. Lastly, always remember with everything, broken record here again, we want to make sure that we are taking care of the root chakra. Receiving this higher wisdom in can be very dysregulating for the body, for the nervous system. So always when you're working with the higher chakras, balance it with working with those lower chakras. So connect into the root chakra, ground, connect into the earth star chakra if you can, and really make sure that your roots and your foundations are as strong as possible. For those of you who are joining me in September for my next level 1 training, please don't worry if you're listening to me talking about all of these different chakras and you don't know what they are, you don't know how to work with them. We do get into that. In level 1, I'm going to teach you how to access your own Akashic records and also how to undertake clearing for yourself. So if you do have past life, ancestral or karmic stuff in the root chakra, for example, and no matter what you're doing, you can't get that feeling of safety and security, and no matter what, the universe has your back, don't panic. 4th of September, we get started. We spend 6 weeks together, and you're going to learn how to move all of this through for yourselves. I do hope that you have found this a helpful episode. This will be coming out at the very end of August. We are almost 2/3 of the way through the year. Please do let me know in the comments if you find these episodes helpful. If there's any topics you ever want discussing, please feel free to reach out to me. Either drop a comment in the podcast section in Spotify or send me a message over on Instagram. And I look forward to seeing you next week for the next episode.